This topic is actually going to be very interesting to a lot of people I know. It's exploring the lived experiences of parents of first-generation college applicants in Jesuit secondary school environments. So welcome. If that's what you came for, you're in the right space, and we'll move ahead. As always, at the Arupe Virtual Learning Institute, we like to start with prayer. So in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we do pray today in particular for all those struggling with health, security, and inclusion during this pandemic. This is a New Year's blessing by Steve Garnas Holmes. Our hope, prayer, and confidence is that in this new year, God will be lovingly present for us, and we will more and more deeply trust God's delight in us. Christ will lead us every step of this new year. The Spirit's gift will unfold in us in new ways. We rejoice that in this new year, beauty will surround us, grace will unfold us, love will embrace and uphold us, joy will bless us, and hope sustain us. May we receive healing and wisdom. May our creativity flower and our courage grow, and in our hands may justice and mercy flourish. We rejoice that these gifts await us in the new year and pray that we receive them with delight. We give thanks for the gift of sharing together the journey of this new year. We pray for the grace of imagination, creativity, and patience. Amen. So, as always, it's my pleasure to start the introductions out with our colleagues at the JSN. And Julia, you're on screen as well. So welcome. Both Julia and Kristen Roscoli are from the Jesuit School Network. And Dr. Kristen Roscoli will introduce our speakers. So I'll introduce her first. Dr. Kristen Roscoli serves as the Director of Research and Development and New Ventures with the Jesuit Schools Network Conference Office. Kristen began her work in Jesuit education in 1999, and prior to her current role at the JSN, she was assistant principal of Regis High School and principal of Loyola High School, both in New York City. So welcome, and I turn the ball over to Kristen. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, and thanks to everyone for being with us here this afternoon. It's terrific to see so many friendly names in the attendees box here. So we're grateful for your time here this afternoon, actually early evening on the East Coast. On behalf of the Jesuit Schools Network Conference Office, I formally welcome you to our latest Ignatian Inquiry virtual session, which is a component of our research development platform. The JSN is eager to encourage a spirit of inquiry across the many layers of our work in Jesuit education. We envision our particular brand of Ignatian inquiry to be the art of inquiry as seen through our Ignatian lens, asking questions and exploring issues that matter in our schools through the frame of our shared Jesuit mission. All of you are familiar with the various events and programs that are supported by the JSN, where we have an opportunity to connect across schools with fellow educators. Programs like our seminars in Ignatian leadership, our many colleague gatherings, and then our colloquium that's held every 3 years. Those opportunities to connect in person provide exceptional means to branch out of our own worlds, our own classrooms and hallways and offices, to learn about the work in other schools that are going on across the network. The idea of these Ignatian Inquiry virtual sessions is that we'll carve out space to connect virtually in the time in between our many in-person gatherings. And of course, in this unusual year where there are none, this is more important than ever. With the support of AVLI, we're able to meet virtually in this space to share and to talk, to listen, and to learn about the good work that's being done in our schools across North America. In this session, we'll learn from Dr. Gina Liberotti about her research exploring the lived experiences of parents of first-generation college applicants in Jesuit secondary school environments. Her presentation employs the best interest of the student model as it focuses on the importance of engaging parents of first-generation students in the secondary educational experience of their students and what factors facilitate or impede their engagement. The application of the best interest of the student in this process intersects with and echoes our Ignatian charism of cura personalis. Dr. Gina Liberotti started at Loyola High School in Los Angeles in 2012 after 15 years of college counseling, helping teens and their families navigate the college discernment and application process. She earned her BA in Developmental Psychology, graduating with honors from UCSB, and co-authored a published study on child abuse. She earned her master's degree in social welfare from UCLA, graduating with honors and publishing her master's thesis. She's worked in several venues: Children's Hospital Los Angeles in the Division of Adolescent Medicine, a consultant for the Pasadena Unified School District, family service agencies, Department of Children and Family Services, Child Abuse Unit, and private practice, all serving teens and their families. She's earned several certificates, including Adolescent Group Treatment, College Counseling UCLA, and Crisis Intervention. She's enjoyed reading and evaluating freshman applications for UC Berkeley for 6 years. She co-created institutional support for first-generation students and their families, and most recently earned her doctorate in interdisciplinary leadership from Creighton University, publishing her dissertation entitled Lives Disrupted: Exploring and Understanding the Lived Experience of Parents, Guardians of First-Generation Students in a Jesuit High School Setting. So we welcome Gina, and I'll turn it over to her to begin to share that research.
Wow, thank you so much, Carol and Kristen. I'm going to share my screen now as well. Let me get this on the forefront, and I will share my screen. Again, thank you. I'm so grateful to be here today to share with you what really resulted from the research I did for my dissertation. As Kristen mentioned, I'm a counselor at Loyola High School in Los Angeles. I'm an advocate for first-generation students and their families. And I'm a first-generation college student myself. I've been in Catholic education for the last 20 years and at Loyola for the last 9. The prayer today really resonated for me, especially the "May our creativity flower and courage grow, and in our hands may justice and mercy flourish." This presentation really is about creativity, and it is about our stories. Just about 2 years ago, I presented on supporting first-generation students in Jesuit secondary schools. The idea was that we cannot intentionally serve our students unless we know who they are. The support for this student population is rooted in the Ignatian charism of cura personalis, ethical decision-making in schools, and best interest of the student model. Part of that presentation was creating a definition of what a first-gen student is, and then how to effectively and reliably identify those students in our schools. Once we know who our students are, we could then reach out to them, invite them into a conversation about their lived experience in high school. What's missing? What barriers in their educational experience do they perceive? This was the jumping off point to expand my exploration into the experience of the parents of our first generation students. So these are some of the questions I want us to consider as we move through this presentation. How do we, at my school, we identified students. How do we effectively identify the students and by extension their families in our schools? Is parent is parent engagement different for our first gen students and for our continuing college families? And what are the best ways that we can engage them? What factors impede and facilitate that engagement? For my school, Loyola High School of Los Angeles, in 2015, we made first gen identification part of the online course registration form. The student has to check a box before he can move on to registering for classes. 6 years later, we have first gen identification on the application for next year's incoming 8th graders. Now that we know how many families are first gen families, what do we know about them? Here's our agenda. We're going to talk about what what engagement is, what it looks like, the impact it has on our student experience, parent engagement, and how it differs from or is disparate in continuing education families and first gen families. Highlights from my school, distance learning and the ever-present Zoom, and our takeaways. So, what do we know about our families? This is, as practitioners, as the boots on the ground, we know that first generation students are different from their non-first gen peers. We know that the limited college knowledge that they have, they may find navigating high school and the college discernment, selection, and application process mystifying. We know that our first gen students are more likely to be students of color, have English as an acquired language, and be immigrants or children of immigrants, and experience economic challenges. So we also know that our first gen students require different specific kinds of support. Support should be initiated by the school structure, meaning teachers, counselors, administrators, moderators. What about our parents? The characteristics of our first generation parents are that they are frequently born outside the United States. They're people of color. They have low facility with English or English as an acquired language, may have lower socioeconomic status, work in quote unquote non-professional jobs, and be more quote unquote challenging to engage in traditional ways. The deficit orientation or deficit thinking is a bias that perceives persons of color or lower SES or first generation or as somehow lesser than, deficient in some way. And so that fuels the perception that those parents of first generation students, are somehow not involved in their students' educational experience and thereby in their success. The deficit orientation creates barriers for engagement. And it is important to shift the lens to a recognition of the cultural knowledge, skills, and abilities possessed by first generation families and marginalized communities. Defining parent engagement. Parent engagement has been demonstrated to have a positive impact at all points along the educational pipeline: grades, educational aspiration, attainment, persistence in high school and college, and mental health. Engagement has been traditionally construed as frequency of contact with school structures, attending school-based events like back-to-school nights, parent conferences, social events, athletic events, and parent association meetings. This definition is more consistent with that of predominantly white institutions, and where the voices heard are frequently those of upper and upper middle class white parents from continuing college-going families. Events are consistent with those of the dominant culture of the school, the language of instruction, and thereby inaccessible or experienced as quote unquote not for them to many of first generation parents. The conceptualization of engagement has been expanded to include encouragement, expectations, acting as a source of vital information and emotional support, home-based behavior such as helping with homework, conversations about classes, course selection, and grades, and providing a space for the student to complete their work and to study. Because the parent of first-gen students may have more or one of the characteristics previously listed, in addition to inexperience with successfully navigating formal educational landscapes, first-generation parents may not participate in school-based opportunities and may not feel they know how to advocate for their student within those school structures. They may rely on the school structure or other resources in the community, such as a family member or friend who has college experience, their parish, a community organization such as Boys and Girls Club. These are also known as protective agents. Still, we know that parent engagement exerts a positive influence and can be pivotal all along the educational pipeline. So the better we intentionally serve our first generation parents in high school, the better the educational outcomes for their students. Part of reimagining parent engagement is recognizing that there is a connection among social networks in the communities of color and immigrant communities and their experiences, the information, and the strategic and cultural resources that flow back and forth in those networks. This is creating what's called funds of knowledge. It refers to the competence, the knowledge, and the skills embedded in the experiences of our marginalized communities that are used to persist in high school, persist in college, to decode the formal educational system, and by extension then create a pathway to participate in the power sharing in those educational institutions. Reimagining engagement comes from an assets-based or strength-based perspective, which recognizes what engagement parents do express, and communicating that the school community values this knowledge and can become part of those social networks. We need to communicate in languages other than English, in written communication and presentations or meetings, making the school structures more accessible to our parents of first-generation students. Reimagining engagement is identifying veteran first-gen parents as parents partners, bridge builders, invite them to be part of our first-gen parent meetings, offering their wisdom and their guidance as how they have done it with their students. Also offering opportunities, not only social. We'll see that there are barriers to that, and that the interactions might be useful interactions. At my school, we offer the summer seminar parent meeting. It's paired with a summer school class. The financial aid meeting, free application for federal student aid, test prep information evening in English and at my school in Spanish. The research tells us that making parent meetings mandatory, typically tethering them to something that will benefit their student, is an effective way to engage parents of first-generation student over time builds trust and community in that school structure. So what do parents say? These are all excerpts of interviews I conducted with my parents of first-generation students, and they demonstrate some of the barriers to engagement, and they guide and educate us on how to address them. We talked about, I'll give you a minute or so for each slide, but this particular parent talks about work schedules and also socioeconomic status, inflexibility of a work schedule. She also talks about that she'd rather spend money on things that her children need and or want rather than to engage socially, purely socially, at a school-centric, school-based event. These two excerpts talk about the disparity perceived in socioeconomic status, that is deemed, that is experienced as exclusionary and definitely off-putting. The second one talks about how they were highly engaged in middle school. This is not uncommon. And that the presentations and the events were always in 2 languages. So again, there's language as a barrier. The idea that you can see this, what's really, really poignant to me is this sentence where she says, you can see right away where they have a different education and they don't see you. So the experience of being invisible is really profound, and that impacts the desire and the willingness and the motivation to be engaged in school-centric opportunities. And this particular excerpt talks about, again, the conflict of work and how parent engagement opportunities that this person may very well clearly wants to participate in are scheduled during the work week and then are clearly skewed toward parents who either have a great deal more flexibility or do not work outside of the home. And so that also means that it's skewed toward those voices, which are usually the white upper and upper middle class voices. So this is who we are at Loyola. And the reason I put this up here is to indicate to show you that we draw from all over the place. We have kids from all over, many, many different zip codes, and that the process of engaging first generation parents can be relevant to and tailored to each school's climate and each school's culture. So how I went about this, the process. As I said 2 years ago and reiterate today, that serving our first generation students and their parents is consonant with our Ignatian identity and the charism of cura personalis, and to the process of ethical decision making, which focuses on duty and responsibility to the well-being of all of the families in our care. As Jesuit institutions, we are also called to evaluate the how, to exercise the ethic of critique and community, and the possible inequitable experience with the policies and practices in our schools. The first step is identifying our parents and the language spoken at home. On my campus, this is done when students register for classes, but this next year we hope it'll be on the application process for admission, like I said. First-gen freshmen are invited to participate in a summer program, summer seminars, which is paired with the summer reading curriculum. This is voluntary. They are invited and encouraged to come, and at our school, gratefully, it is paid for. So that is not an insignificant factor there for us. But again, that's something that can be, there's a workaround there. Reaching out to families via multiple modalities, and not just one time, repeated times, specifically to that family and to that student. Letters home, emails, communicate through the student. When we were on campus, I would not only email the student, but put something in their backpack and say, hey, take this home to your parents and let's talk about it. Also following up with reminders in English, and in my school community, the most frequently spoken language other than English is Spanish, and tether mandatory parent meetings to student participation in these programs. So in the summer seminar program or to any other first generation student opportunity. At Loyola, I had a parent meeting halfway through the summer seminars in Spanish and English, and it was great. It was really successful. This year, I will be partnering with our admissions department and begin contacting first generation parents right after they accept an offer of admission to our school. And then again, during the summer school, hopefully they will all participate in the summer seminars, or most of them will. We get about 85–90% of the kids who participate. And again, right before we start school in the fall, in case they have any other questions right before school starts, which they typically do. Polling the parents after each experience. This is super easy to do. And a poll of the parents revealed that they would value meeting during the year. So now I am going to start meeting once a semester, focusing on what has transpired in the previous semester and what is coming next. Each meeting is guided by questions and concerns identified prior to the meeting, through asking the students directly and reaching out directly to the parents as well. Mainly like, what are some of the things you and your parents are concerned about? What are the kitchen table conversations that they're having regarding freshman year, choosing classes? What about grades? What if I don't understand something? Who do I contact? How do I approach a teacher? College entrance tests, what do they mean? How much do they cost? And more recently, distance learning, recognizing that there can be an issue with connectivity, shared devices among family members. Also, the importance of communication. And the bottom line is, if I don't know, if my families don't tell me, if our families don't tell us, then we can't help them. So take an evaluative poll after each meeting. What worked, what didn't, to maintain the relevance of the process and shed what doesn't work. Don't be married to anything if it doesn't work. In some subsequent meetings, veteran parents are invited as bridge builders and guides, offering additional layer of trust and community and wisdom sharing. I was concerned that Zoom would be another barrier, but the parent polls indicated that Zoom actually has made it easier for them to attend. There's no traffic or transportation issues. They don't have to leave work early or arrange for childcare, for example. So Zoom may very well remain an important part of engagement for this parent group. And keep track of what works. So the takeaways are we are really talking about our aligning our practice with Jesuit values, the ethics of care and community and critique, consonant with the standards and benchmarks of Jesuit schools, and within the theoretical framework of best interest of the student. Ask your parents what they need and then develop it. Enhancing the engagement of first generation students can be effective on any campus. It can be consonant, it has to be consonant with the culture and the climate of your school, or it's not going to work. And it can be executed within the confines of varying school budgets. And it can also be employed as a marketing tool. We are definitely using it at Loyola as a marketing tool. So as I said at the outset, this work is grounded in the ethic of critique and community and care, the Ignatian charism about cura personalis and best interest of the student. It is about stories. It's the stories of the lived experience of our students, their families, and our institutions. The exploration of the lived experience of first generation parents at my school led me to believe we'd been telling incomplete stories. Incomplete stories about our students and the families in our care and their experience with engagement in Jesuit secondary educational settings. This meant we were also telling incomplete stories about our institutions, and I felt compelled to explore a more robust narrative. In the shared stories of our first generation students and their family lies the data that informs program development and policy formation grounded in cura personalis and the ethics of critique, care, and community. Intentionally serving our students and their parents allows us to craft a more complete, more robust narrative that informs improved practice and enhances an inclusive and more equitable experience for more of our parents. So please contact me if you have any. You can certainly ask questions now, but here there is a reference list available upon request. I've put my school email up there, and certainly consultation conversations are more than welcome. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Gina. And I will, I'll kick off our Q&A period here. So I'd ask everyone on the call, we have a couple of questions that have been posed in the chat window, which is terrific. And I'll give you a few more moments to do that while I ask our first couple of questions, kind of getting the conversation started. So you had a great deal of experience with this population of first generation students and families before you started your formal research process. What was your biggest surprise as you transitioned from kind of your day-to-day anecdotal work with kids and families into a formal research process? What was the biggest surprise that you learned from that?
I think the biggest surprise was that what I learned through the interviews and through the research was exactly what I was experiencing every day, is that our families don't know what they don't know. And that in the past, we have, the expectation was is that families, if you have a question, you reach out to the institution. And that's not what it is. It is incumbent upon the institution to reach out consistently and reliably and in an inclusive way to our parents, especially our first generation parents, because they don't have the experience with successfully navigating formal educational landscapes. They are reticent to do so. And so by, I think, like I said, the biggest surprise is that what I had experienced with my students and what they were telling me, you know, the bumps, the obstacles that they were facing in applying to school, or in like, how do you, I didn't ask my teacher, I didn't tell my teacher I don't have my book. Those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of things that are issues of connectivity, of belongingness, of trust, of building that relationship with our families. I think that was the biggest surprise, is that yeah, this is, thank goodness. I mean, who knows what to expect, but in this case it was, yeah, this is exactly what's going on.
One of the things that you said that really resonated, I think, deeply with me is the idea that our institutions may be telling incomplete stories of the kids in our care, you know, and for us to really think about that. And from your experience, Loyola's program with first generation students is really the top of its kind. I mean, it's impressive in every way. And having been there for so long, can you speak for a moment directly to some of the schools, perhaps some of the people on the calls who haven't really begun to raise in any way the first generation student conversation in their own schools? What was it like in your early days as first generation was kind of a new concept, for lack of a better way of saying it? And how did you start to raise that? How did you build this conversation to be the important one that it is today in your school?
That's a really good question, Kristen. Thank you for asking that, because originally it was very organic. It was, as those of us in education know, we spend a lot of time reacting, right? It's like a student comes to you, they bring this issue, and all of a sudden you're going, oh, okay, I'm going to fix that. I will address that issue. And it doesn't really zoom out and look at, like, if this is happening for this student, like, maybe it's happening for other kids too. And that's actually how it happened. I had started just, we didn't have any way of reliably knowing who these kids are. And how I thought that there might be something there is that I would hold college application work sessions during lunchtime. And a student would come and be one kid, and he would be telling me things like, well, there was something about what he wasn't saying. And I would ask him, are you the first person in your family to go to college, or did your parents go to school? And he would say no, and I would go, oh, okay, different conversation. Let's start here. Let's back out of this. Let's do this. And then the next Tuesday, or whatever day it would be, there'd be 3 boys, because of their shared peer capital. They're depending on each other. They've got that subterranean conversation going on. It's like, come to this meeting, come to this workshop. She's going to talk to you about how to make this happen. So I thought, okay, if I'm learning this when they're in the last part of their junior year, that's too late. So if I've got 1 kid one day, 4 kids the next day, 8 kids the next week after that, there might be more children here that are not benefiting in the fullest way that they can from our experience at our school. And I brought this to my supervisor and I said, I think there's something here. I think we need to figure out how to reliably identify them. So there was always like at least I had some data to support it, like X number of kids are doing this. And originally it was like, okay, relying on each counselor to ask this question in their first interview of the year. Well, that didn't happen. So now that data is incomplete. And then we had the online information management system, PowerSchool, which allowed us to do this. Like, okay, so let's figure this out. And part of that too was that inviting kids, letting kids know in the communication among the students that we're going to have this. We're going to talk about what you would have liked to have happened for you and your family as a senior, like looking back, what you would have liked to have had happen and what was missing. When we found that out, we realized that we had a lot more kids who we were overlooking, and overlooking in a significant way. And if we're overlooking them, then we are also overlooking their families. So that's how it started. And then we were able to make it part of our course registration process electronically, make it smart, so that they had to check a box per a definition, which for us is, your son is a first generation college applicant if neither of his parents earned a bachelor's degree in the United States. And we expanded that because our families always educate us, right? This is what's so great. That they were saying, okay, well, I went to college for a little while, or I went to community college, and so I'm not a first generation college applicant. My parents went to community college. But in the broader spectrum, we have included those, that part of the definition, because some college and community college is not the same part of the conversation, it's not the bigger conversation. And we have found that that really does help and make that service and that make the service more robust for our students. Does that answer that question? I kind of got all excited there.
No. I mean, to me, what I hear you saying is, you know, it's like so much of the good work across our schools that it really takes someone who's working directly with kids every day, with students every day and families every day to connect the dots and to see the patterns of the issues that are in front of them. And then it takes the initiative of that person to raise the conversation in a broader way, you know. And then the challenge, of course, for schools, it is a data collection piece, right? It is, It is, in your case, putting the first generation box on a course selection form, but it's a way to make sure that we're not missing students. It's one of the things that the Jesuit Schools Network has tried to support by beginning to collect data across the network from schools on first generation students.
And I think we've been doing better. I looked at the JSN annual report and we're doing better.
Yeah, and that's a new challenge, you know, for many schools. And figuring out in their context, how do you raise this conversation? How do you start when it hasn't been raised before? Part of your work is really seeing the value of raising it and seeing this population of families and students that ought to be served and perhaps need to be served more, you know, within our communities. So,
and I think more intentionally too, I think I don't want to overlook the importance of that initial organic anecdotal data collection. It doesn't have to be a scary thing. It's just like a wow moment where I'm thinking like, wow, that's more kids. And then bringing that to an ally. And in my case, my direct supervisor was an ally in that conversation, and also knowing that as a student-centered endeavor, is that if we're not serving our students, then there's something like that has to be changed then. So that mentality of best interest of the student-centered, action-oriented progress is really important. But it's important not to be perceived as a henny penny, but more as this is a data-driven initiative that reflects and aligns with our Jesuit values and again, the benchmarks and standards of Jesuit education.
Gina, I don't mean to interrupt, but there are a number of questions that have been posed. And the first one that was posed actually while you were presenting is very much about this subject of bringing people in and trying to make sure that they're included in the conversation. And so this question from Sarah Bennett: how do we practice seeing and interacting with this population of people? And her question was posed in particular when you were talking about families, the parents, not from a position of detriment, but in a way where we acknowledge and honor them as individuals first and foremost, who have often overcome many challenges, but who are so much more than their label we often assign to them.
Wow, thank you, Sarah. Sarah, yes. So I think, I mean, the way that I did it, which is, let me kind of back up a little bit, is that with our first generation parents, the student is frequently the intermediary. They have been frequently the intermediary for a very long time. They've been translators, they have been navigators, all those kinds of things, that they've been in that role. And so I kind of use the students as my entry level to conversations with the parents. Again, it is asking the students in small groups so that, you know, and everybody's first gen, so nobody's being outed, their feeling of exposure is real. We have to recognize that. And to ask them what their parent concerns are. What are the concerns of the family? And knowing that, what's a good time for me to call your mom? She works during the day. Okay, so is a caregiver. She cleans houses, maybe. Maybe one of my families works in the laundry at a hotel. And so we also have to be flexible and respectful and say, okay, she's got a big job. She's working really hard. And I want to make sure that if I text her, will she respond to me? It's these kinds of questions of like, then she and I can have a conversation, right? And I think that's it, is that it's not, well, you know what, if she can't make this meeting, I don't really know what we're going to do. So the idea that really is using the student as the conduit for a little while. But eventually what happens is that the parent recognizes that they can have a conversation with you. They can reach out to me directly and say, hey, Dr. Liberotti, what about, I need a fee waiver, or this test is a lot of money. Is there some way that we can pay for it? And I'm going, let me find that out. Or yes, I can do that for you. And saying things like, you know, Johnny is doing really well in school. You are doing a great job. Right? It's that kind of just affirmation. And again, if the whole Zoom thing has really been a boon to this, oddly enough, of being able to get folks on one screen and say it for them, right? Like, even if you have to make it up sometimes, and I do, because I know who they are and I know what their concerns are. I'll say, you know, sometimes our parents are concerned with what if about the grades for my son? How is he going to earn these grades? And should he take APs and earn a B, or even sometimes it's like, we don't have the books for this particular class. And that can be a really hard thing to say because it makes you feel like a failure. And a lot of my parents said that. And it is our job then to reflect back to them that the fact that your son is here now and doing what he is now is that you are anything but. So it's that kind of validation, I think. But I did back into it by using the students, and but it is a process. And when that student comes home and says, Dr. Liberotti's got this, and they go, whoa, okay, great. And they're more willing to share, they're more willing to converse, they're more willing to engage.
Here's a question that pertains to what you just mentioned in terms of a student, for example, mentioning, I need some help with something, and you're saying you'll find out. I have a question early on from Carlos Jimenez, who wants to know, can you describe who the stakeholders are in terms of supporting first-generation students and parents at Loyola? And do you have a designated department or team?
Okay, who are the stakeholders? Well, you know what? It's the entire school, right? Basically, because you do have to kind of win hearts and minds. And that's why in the beginning, finding out who your like-minded colleagues are. So there are some teachers who don't understand why you would want to talk to a first-gen student any differently than you would anybody else. There are some administrators who were who took offense initially and actually confronted me and said, do you really think we don't serve our students with intentionality? And my response was, I think when we know our students better, we can do a better job. And that's what I think. So when we know our students better, we can do a better job. So the stakeholders are certainly the internal stakeholders are the students. We have the administrators. We need somebody. You can have the best idea in the world, and unless you have somebody in your corner that you can convince, like my immediate supervisor, Dr. Paul Jordan, great guy, he was the one that I came to and said, this is what's going on. Will you let me? And I did, you know, I also did a little bit of research. Here's what the literature says about first-generation families and their students. So it's not just me making it up. It's not just happening here at Loyola in a little microscopic way, but there's literature to back this. So again, it's that intentionality on my part to illustrate that there is an additional need in our community. And because we are a Jesuit school and we are charged with caring for the entire person and we expand that to their parents, then we, you know, they got to come along. I mean, in my head, it's just like, they have to come along, right? And so it is also on the student level, on the organic student level, is let's create a student association. Costs no money whatsoever. Come to A201 on Tuesday at lunchtime. You might have to buy pizza, but you know, other than that, and come and talk about whatever the hooks are, college applications. How do you get into AP and honors? Why would you do that? Meet other students who are just like you, and let's talk about what's important to us. So the first meeting of the First Generation Students Association, there were probably 30 kids. Blew my mind. And the best conversation I heard was two boys who they saw each other, clearly knew each other. One was an Asian American young man, one was an African American young man. And one of them said to the other, dude, I didn't know you were first gen. And I thought, isn't that lovely? This is what it's all about. This is that intersectionality of identities that we talk about. The students are the stakeholders, the teachers are the stakeholders. And once we can use the data and the progress, little incremental progress that we have, that helps folks adapt and adopt a more inclusionary mindset. This was actually in 2015, 2017, one of the drivers to shifting our campus culture to one of greater inclusion and diversity. And it's just those little incremental things along the way. So find your allies at your school, like-minded teachers, like-minded administrators, like-minded counselors. Do we have a department? No. We have myself and the First Generation Students Association, and this last November I recruited our teachers. November for post-secondary schools is celebrating First Generation student status, right? So I thought, I am totally stealing that, and I'm going to do it at Loyola. So I reached out to the teacher body, and I said, if you are a first generation student like me, under this definition, would you consider making a short video saying, hey, I'm a teacher here, this is what I teach, I'm proud to be a first gen student, you have allies here. So many of them stepped up and did that. My students from the First Generation Students Association, I asked them to do the same thing. And it was on our news feed during the month of November, and it was super cool. So it's those kinds of things that really don't cost anything, that address all the stakeholders, the administrators, the teachers, the students, the parents. And like I said, it could also be used as a marketing tool. Did I answer that question?
Yes, I think you did. And you mentioned during the process of answering the question, people have to sort of be brought on board. And I know that probably also has to do, it always has to do at schools with scheduling. Brendan Conroy's question is, how long are the summer seminars? 1 week, longer, which certainly pertains to involving larger groups at the school, and what kind of way you're going to facilitate or navigate that population in the summer?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we did initially have an entire summer school class that was called College Connections. And it initially was the entire summer school, 5 weeks. It was paired with freshman English reading class. So you took your freshman English reading in the morning, and then an hour later, you spent another 90 minutes with these other guys. Part of that College Connections class was visiting the 3 of our local universities and having targeted presentations for them on first generation questions and how do you apply and what does that mean, and taking a walk on campus and all that kind of good stuff. So this year, because of the virtual environment that was forced upon us, we weren't able to visit the college campuses. And we have a new curriculum that is going through our school that is more of a scaffolded onboarding for all of our students. And so it ate up some of the real estate that the College Connections class originally had. And I said, okay, that's fine, but still that onboarding experience for all of our kids is still not addressing specific issues for my first generation students. You know, as I call them, my students. And so I said, so I reviewed the curriculum, and then I recrafted this to fit into the last 3 weeks, of the summer session. So you're still in summer school. It's not anything beyond summer school. And we have a specific curriculum that is targeted to or intended to unpack the identity of being a first generation student. We have a glossary that has, you know, words like, or phrases like imposter syndrome, survivor guilt, these kinds of things that give kids a label. I don't know about you, when I found out about imposter syndrome, I went, oh, I've had that my entire life. Is that what that is? That's what that feeling is? So being able to attach a label to it and to see kids go like this, you're saying, yeah, that's it. You're not weird. This is part of the lens that we have on the world. And so it was taught by the same teacher who also happens to be a first generation college applicant, who taught the freshman English, the freshman summer reading session. So for the 3 weeks, 3 additional weeks in that parentheses by summer school, English summer school, also focused on these other things. So there were reading assignments that were also like had first gen themes to them. And then that got tied into the conversations about unpacking first generation identities. So it's not, again, the scheduling is a real issue, 100%, but they weren't on campus or they weren't online any more or less than they would have been if they didn't go to summer school. So the summer seminars are embedded in summer school and not accessible outside of that. Did that make sense?
Yes, I think it does. I'm just trying to follow the questions here. If you had your question fully answered there, Brendan, or not, follow up after it. But it was our understanding, you know, that you were talking specifically about the time, which is really interesting, and also which clarifies what you faced when you could no longer make those visits to campus, how you addressed that. So thank you so much for that information. Here's a question from Jennifer Holtz. She asks, can you speak about how your role as first generation support coordinator impacted your other roles or caseloads? And do you have a smaller caseload, or do you serve as the counselor to all first generation students? So she's interested in the impact this has made on your career overall at school.
Right. You know, there was a moment where the possibility of being the counselor for our first generation students was really seriously considered. The reality though is that first generation college students are require more hands-on. They require additional more engagement and more they just require more and different because they don't know what they don't know. So I could say to a student who is from a continuing college family, go fill this out, and then I'll talk to you next week. I would say that to that same first generation college student, and then he would look at that, maybe try to do it, and then come back with like one thing filled out and go like, I don't know what this means. So it's that kind of thing. It was recognizing that we have to offer them a toolbox, a different toolbox. We have to offer them a vocabulary. And because part of that is that if you don't know what you don't know, then you don't have the words to ask the questions either. So if we offer the vocabulary, You give them the labels for the experience, and then that helps them engage in a different, more robust way. So for me to be the only counselor would mean I would never go home. I would be in my office all the time. So it was a decision of my supervisor that to sensitize all the counselors in the department on what are the issues of our first gen kids. And I did have to more than once go to a new counselor, because I would be able to overhear. I say, you got these kids on your caseload. Let me know if I can help you. And I would, because my office happened to be right across from this other counselor's office, and I would overhear and I would think, he doesn't get it. He's sending that kid off with a form and thinking that's going to happen. And then being able to go and speak to that colleague peer to peer, saying, this is great, but the fact of the matter is that he's not going to do that. And he's not going to do it because of these things. So if you can engage him in a little more depth and just a little differently, knowing that this is how he's seeing the world, this is how he's hearing you, is going to benefit your relationship with this student. So no, I didn't take on all the kids, because that's way too much. I would need another 2 or 3 counselors just to do that. Sensitizing all of our counselors to the issues and the specific needs of first generation students expands their lens on who our students are and who our families are, and enriches their experience as counselors, right? And what was the other question? It was.
I backed up. I was answering 2 others in the meantime. How it impacted your caseload? Did you serve a smaller caseload? Do you serve as the counselor to all first generation, which you just answered?
Right.
Quite off. So that was.
It doesn't impact my caseload. We are divvied up evenly across all 4 grade levels for all of the counselors at my school.
Well, Kristen, I'm just going to ask you, it's 2 minutes to the hour, and we try to really stick close to our 1 hour window, knowing what we know about brain science and how one responds to this virtual environment. So I'm going to say thank you very much, and I'm going to let Kristen close it out. But this has been very interesting. And as always, thank you so much for the opportunity, Kristen and Gina. To be able to partner with JSN on this is really our honor. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And thank you to everyone. We will honor the time that we had allotted here. So there's some terrific other questions that are in the chat window that we're not going to get to, unfortunately, but we will share at the conclusion of this with everyone who's registered this video recording, and then Gina's contact information as well. So we'd encourage you to follow.
Please.
There are lots of folks on this call from various roles around the Jesuit Schools Network and beyond. There's principals and counselors and diversity directors and graduate support folks, and people who are working with first generation students and people who are interested in working with first generation students. So we hope that it's been a fruitful hour. We thank Gina for your time, and your work here is really a terrific example of the kind of practitioner research, people who are doing work with our students and who are really taking it a level deeper, and making sure that learning isn't just shelved somewhere on a bookcase, but that it's shared with our colleagues around the JSN. So we're really grateful to that. Grateful to you, Gina, and to you, Carol, as well, and to everyone for spending the hour with us. So thank you. And and all the best. A great rest of the day.
Thank you so much. This has just been lovely, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And please contact me. I'm more than happy to respond.
Wonderful. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye.